destination people always seem to find the magic and the mystery in this beautiful world. Don't get left behind.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Tom Anderson, and this is Workshop on Wednesday with Destinations Together. As always, a warm welcome to everyone tuning in. We want to thank you all for joining us today on this, our first ever Workshop on Wednesday, featuring MHG Insurance with Conor Hayes, Manager of Business Development for the United States, the Caribbean, and Latin America, and Mark Barton, Manager of Business Development handling Europe, Asia, and the rest of the world. Today's session is designed as a follow-up from our MHG Insurance webinar last week. This workshop format gives you the opportunity to ask your questions in person for a more in-depth discussion on insurance. We'll get into the finer details of the insurance application, as well as next steps. We look forward to receiving your questions and a very interactive session today. Thanks again for being here. It's great to see so many familiar faces. I'll pass the virtual mic over to Larry to get started. Larry?
Hey, thanks, Tom. And thanks everybody for being here. It's so great to see some recognizable, faces. And again, please feel free to put your video on, but also those that have registered. Great to have you with us. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. We are recording this meeting. We'll be happy to send out a recording to everybody. We have Conor and Mark back with us, and they'll provide a brief overview of insurance. To set the stage. Meanwhile, everybody will be muted. When you have a question, we ask that everybody digitally raise your hand, and Tom or I will invite you to open up your mic and camera and proceed to ask Conor and Mark your questions. So we will do our best to ensure everybody gets a chance to ask questions as Conor and Mark do their presentation. Please keep your questions to the topic being discussed, and at the end of the presentation, we will allow for additional insurance questions outside of the content being reviewed. So as they present each slide, we ask you to ask your questions pertinent to that slide. Raise your hand and we'll bring you on to verbally ask Conor and Mark. If you're not able to get everybody's questions, if we're not able to get everybody's questions answered, please feel free to email Conor Hayes or Mark Barton. You'll see their email addresses as the presentation proceeds. Or feel free to contact Mark or I. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark and to Conor to go ahead and proceed at this point for the presentation.
Hi, and welcome to MHG Insurance and our webinar on shore excursion operators insurance, hosted by our friends at Destination Together. So thank you again for tuning in. My name's Mark Barton. I'm co-hosting this with my colleague Conor Hayes. If we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so what is tour excursion and operators liability insurance and what's its real purpose? What does the program cover? What are its key features? How application form works and who we are as MHG? Well, if I can start off, if we can just note, we're in a new world because of the new operations restarting, and many shore excursion operators are facing several new operating procedures in this post-pandemic world, one of which is providing insurance that meets the minimum requirements of the cruise lines. And it's these minimum requirements which are seldom met by local insurance policies. Few cruise lines are now allowing the passengers to arrange their own excursions, so the vast majority of the shore excursions are being arranged and purchased via the cruise itself. This is therefore making insurance mandatory for many in the shore excursion industry. So if we could move to slide 3. Okay, what we've arranged and what we have is a contingent liability insurance designed to bridge the gap between the program you're buying from your local insurers to that required by the cruise line. It's a hybrid product. It's covering both P&C and ocean risks, and it satisfies these requirements of the cruise industry. So it's not for US-based excursion operators, but for everybody else in the world, especially those operating anywhere else but involving a cruise line that is American based or partly American based. So if we could go to slide 3, or the next slide rather. Okay, these minimum insurance requirements. So the cover's got to include everybody in the cruise line operation, including all their subsidiaries and affiliates, which includes, of course, their US offices. It's a contingent cover, so it also requires us to provide contingent auto and, where necessary, contingent waterborne insurance. So again, picking up the risks that the local insurers don't cover. The insurance itself has got to be with an international insurer that's rated by AM Best, and that minimum there is A, or it's got to be Standard & Poor's A. So our program is actually placed with Lloyd's of London, so we have no problems. And then last point is that on this particular slide is that the insurance needs to be a primary cover, non-contributory. That means it will perform directly to the cruise line. This is probably a good point to ask about these requirements. As I said, the slide itself is based on the requirements issued by one of the major US insurers, US cruise lines rather. Is there anybody out there with a question on this? Okay, I think we should move on. I'm sure there will be further questions as we go through. The next requirement, the cruise line require that this insurance has a 30-day notice clause, so that the policy cannot just be cancelled without giving the cruise line notice. As we've already said, that the jurisdiction on the policy has to be worldwide. And this is the major point here, is that we're covering claims in both USA and Canada. A lot of policies to provided by local insurers will not cover those US claims. Then the amount of coverage required. This is generally the US cruise lines require either a minimum of $1 million or $2 million. There have been requirements for $5 million, but at the moment that's proving problematic because of the loss record in the market. There are not that many insurers wanting or willing to write the excess layers of cover at the moment. And then the last point here, if the local insurance provides higher limits, then those higher limits must prevail. In other words, you cannot reduce your local insurance policy down to a level below the minimum statutory requirements of your jurisdiction. For example, in the EU, the local policy does cover 6 million euros worth of liability, but you won't be able to reduce that down because you bought this policy instead. Cruise line's still going to want to see that minimum level on your local policy. While we're on this subject of the minimums and the statutory requirements, there have been instances where local insurers do offer cover that is below the levels that our underwriters will accept. And in that instance, we either have arranged a top-up insurance with a local underwriter, or we've actually not been able to arrange a facility at all because the underwriters in our insurance market will require minimum levels of cover. Connor's going to get onto that when we go through the application form. Any questions on this?
Mark, just to clarify one quick little point. From the cruise line perspective, if a cruise line has a question about the cover that a tour operator is presenting, obviously they would and could go back to the tour operator, but could they also go to you as MHG and say, hey, I'm not totally clear on the certificate or some of the details of it? Because sometimes these things, when you sit in the chair at the cruise line, can be a little bit confusing to make sure that the amount of coverage is really what's required by the cruise line.
Well, yeah, it's a good point. In fact, the biggest cruise group, if you like, they actually will specify to their shore excursion operators who they should go to get cover. And at the moment, there's a short list of 2. We're one of those 2 providers. So the cruise lines do actually actively involve themselves on ensuring that these facilities are at the correct level, the correct quality of insurer, and offer the correct levels of cover. So yeah, the cruise lines themselves are quite actively involved. Yeah,
May I have a
right.
question? Yeah.
Yeah, Jack.
I'm Jackie from Myanmar. We are cruise tour operators for especially from US cruises and Europe, almost over 2 decades. So regarding your presentation, the flight tour and scuba tour are not including your package. So as you know, today we do expect in near futures, expedition cruise will call to Asia. So we also have our many archipelago in southern parts of Myanmar. At that time, you know, expedition cruise, scuba tour and others, diving tours are compulsory when we organize. So at that time, they were asked, scuba tour is normally this adventure cruise, they used to bring their own facility, seasport facility, because we have a very limited facility to provide the passengers cruise on board. But right now, if we can extend this scuba tour business, so we can apply as an additional policy or not.
I'm going to ask Conor to come in on this, because Conor was instrumental in helping to put together this insurance package. And we have got, as you'll see from our application form when we get to it, he's got extensive involvement and into the various types of excursions that we can cover. So Conor, if you could give us some guidance on this.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, excuse me. Ordinarily, scuba is excluded under our program, as are aviation or aerial related tours. Now, they are ordinarily excluded. That's not to say that we cannot ask our underwriters to make an exception. If it's a particularly attractive risk that is well maintained, you know, there's a clearly very good risk management practices put in place, it is possible for our insurers to make an exception and to insure these tours. But it's not, scuba is not insured on a blanket basis. It would have to be on a case by case basis. So really the answer to your question, Jackie, is that it's possible, although we would need the relative information from you. Does that make sense?
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome.
Excellent. Okay, thanks. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay. Okay. So, as I said, the coverage we are providing here is but commercial general liability, which is coverage from the ground up, primarily, as I said, to cover CGL claims in the US market. It's also providing contingent auto liability. And contingent means that the local auto policy still remains in force and is paramount. And that local auto policy should have a minimum limit on it of $300,000 for any cars or small vehicles that carry less than, I think, about 8 or 9 passengers. But anything that's considered a bus or coach, that needs $500,000 of local auto liability insurance. Again, we're looking at the contingent watercraft passenger liability. Again, we'd expect a minimum limit there of 500,000. If we can go to the next slide. Oh, before we do, again, any questions about this? As I mentioned earlier, we are aware that in, for example, the EU, the auto liability policies within the European Union all provide 6 million euros of cover for liability. Here in the UK, it's unlimited. There is no limit on the auto liability. but we are also aware that in other jurisdictions we've come across, those limits can be far lower. And it's worth mentioning that our underwriters are not able, and we are not able, to offer cover where these limits go below 300,000 for a car or 500,000 for a bus, unless we sit down and discuss it with our underwriters first. It's not a complete no, but it's not going to be easy. So what we've done in many cases is got the local insurers to provide a higher limit. Okay, as I said before, this is very much a policy that's contingent, and it bridges the gap between your local insurance and the coverage required by the cruise line, and that mostly is worldwide jurisdiction, worldwide territory with no exclusions. Next slide. Okay, I think at this point we're going to hand over to Conor, who's going to go through the application form. But before we do, are there any more questions? Okay, Conor, I think it's over to you, and this is probably where the questions are going to arise, which is the monster of our application form.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. That's very kind of you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Conor Hayes. I am the Manager of Business Development at MHG at our headquarters in Fort Lauderdale in South Florida. So the purpose of going through the application form is to simplify the process, because an incomplete, as I mentioned last week, an incomplete application is the single biggest impediment to obtaining a quote from insurers. Once we collate the information that we need, we can turn around a quote. We normally tell people between 3 to 5 days, but really we can do it sooner than that. It just really depends on us getting the information that we need. It can seem a little bit laborious at the beginning, because it is an extensive application process. It is quite involved, and we do request a lot of additional information. But once we do it the first year, you will find that once the policy comes up for renewal the second year, it's pretty straightforward. So as I mentioned last week, again, when it comes to insurance, information is king. It is king, because the more information that the underwriter has, the more comfortable that he or she will be with the risk, and therefore the more flexibility or negotiation power that you'll have in the quotation process. So with that said, we're going to start on page 1. As you see, section A is pretty self-explanatory. Just make sure that your information is current, because touch wood, should there ever be a claim, the loss adjuster that may be appointed by the insurance company will be referring to the application form, you know, in order to contact you. Now, regarding section B, it is important that you give us a correct split of how much of your business emanates from hotels and from cruise lines or other, but also it's very important that you let us know how much what percentage of US nationals or guests would constitute your business. The reason being is that there's discounts available under the policy if the percentage of US nationals falls under a certain degree. Now, that's not to say you're penalized if you have 100% US nationals. That's not the case at all. But it is important to clarify what percentage of US nationals. So insurers have an idea of their exposure in terms of US lawsuits. Any questions before we move on to the next slide?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Conor, yeah. The average price of your excursion tour, I think we've come across where this price has to equate to the number of actual total tours and the turnover. Which
that is correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, the reason why we request average ticket price of the tours is so we can verify your revenues. So because what it really is that your revenues really should be, and again, we'll find this on, I believe, page 4 of the application once we get there. How we verify your revenues is that it's pretty straightforward. We just take the average ticket price, we multiply it by your estimated number of guests for the forthcoming 12 months, which should equate to the gross revenues or gross estimate sales that you put on page 4 of the application. But we'll be visiting that later on. Any questions?
Hunter, I've got one.
Go
and
ahead.
that is in and around, do you operate in other countries, yes or no? And then obviously list those countries. What's that pertaining to? Is it that, okay, if I'm working in the Bahamas, but I also have a business in Belize, I don't need insurance with you guys in Belize. Is that you know, something that if you combine 2 countries, there's a benefit, or anything in and around 2 countries that I run business at, I can get somewhat of a better deal, let's say?
Not necessarily. It's just for the purpose of that question is for sure is to better understand the scope of the proposed operations. Like, it's quite common, particularly in Central America, you might have an operator that you know, that does business in Roatan and in Guatemala. You come across quite a number of them. So as long as the information is combined, like for the sales and the passenger numbers in the one application form, we should be able to collate the information that we need to ensure both operations, or if there's even more operations, by virtue of just using the one application form. But it is important for insurers to know if there's any other operations outside of the main country of the domicile.
Okay, a follow-up question on that is the name of my company in Roatan is Stauffer Tours. In Belize, my name of my company is Tours by Stauffer. That's 2 applications, I would assume, correct?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily, because under the applicant name, it is possible to insure multiple entities under the one policy.
Okay.
It is. So under the applicant name there, you would simply write like the name of the 2 entities, but also clarify under section B that, you know, one's in Belize and one's in you know, Honduras.
Okay.
Conor, one quick question in section B. When you talk about cruise lines, and also the guest line, when you say cruise lines, do expedition cruises fit into cruise lines, or is that other? And
that's Mark, you want to help me out with that question, because I'm not too sure.
I'm pretty sure it's cruise lines. What we're talking about here is where your business comes from. Whether the business is coming to you from a cruise line, an expedition ship, they're both going to have similar requirements for the shore excursion insurance. Other could be business from, I know, yachts or something like this, or other tour companies, but something other than cruise business. So I think shore excursions and cruise lines all fits. The cruise lines and expedition cruises will be one and the same for the filling out of this form.
okay.
Okay, any further questions before we move on? Okay, section C. Right, now this section can cause a lot of confusion, because what insurers are asking for here on section C is your current tour operator's policy, not your current local policies, like your local watercraft, your local auto/motor policy. That information gets input into a different section. This is to ask, basically, to find out if you're carrying tour excursion or tour operators insurance already. And as my colleague Mark pointed out, there's currently only 2 providers in the market. So it's likely going to be us or the other provider. Section D, if there's no claims, perfect. Make sure you check that box. If you've had no claims in the last 5 years, check that box. If you have a claim, now this is when I like to emphasize, you know, to tour operators out there, Insurers are not trying to catch you out. They're not trying to penalize you. They're just trying to better understand the functioning and risk management practices of your company. If you've had a claim, if there was a significant claim, where underwriters are probably going to need additional information surrounding this particular claim. Again, it's not to penalize you, it's not to catch you out. It's like claims do happen that are beyond your control, that are beyond that happen due to circumstances beyond your control. As I mentioned last week, a common claim that we do come across would be a guest of advanced age with a pre-existing medical condition that overexerts themselves while in the water and sustains, a heart attack or a stroke. We have seen that is a very, very common claim. As long as you made sure that particular guest was a competent swimmer, then how were you to know, that circumstances like that would arise? So again, but it is important to be transparent and disclose that information to insurers. So if there has been a serious claim, please provide supplementary information. Just write it on a narrative on a Microsoft Word document will work. But does anybody have any questions regarding that?
There is one in the chat, if you can read that one. It's from Marcelino.
Okay, 1 second. Yes, correct. If we're correct. If we are insuring guests. Sorry, the question from Marcelino was, when you mentioned that the web, I presume, application needs to include the revenues for hotels that we reserve for customers coming by plane, does this mean that we are insured for accidents that might happen in hotels? Okay, if we're insuring guests that come from hotels, it is possible that we may be able to insure them for accidents at the hotel, but only if they're at the hotel for the purposes of, let's say, embarking on a tour. So let's just say the tour begins in the hotel parking lot where the guest boards the bus or coach. If for some reason the guests were to slip as a result of the operator's negligence, yes, it is possible that that injury would be covered under the policy, but the injury must have been sustained in conjunction with the tour, if that makes sense.
Marcelino, assuming that makes sense, great. If not, please feel free to raise your hand and you can ask a follow-up question or put it in chat. But Conor, I do have a question for you.
Go ahead.
I'm a tour operator in Belize, but I also do tours with hotels and not cruise ships. Can I still get your insurance?
Yes, correct. Okay, next slide, please. Local policy information. Just like I mentioned in the previous slide, this is where you put your local policy information. It is critical that you provide this information and also a copy of the policies. It's probably one of the most important parts of the application process. So please provide us with, sorry, we have another question here. Hello, can we register multiple cruise lines companies? When you say register, do you mean add them to the policy as an additional insured? Yes, absolutely. You can add as many cruise lines to the policy as an additional insured. Does that answer the question? Hopefully so. Okay. So local policy information, guys, we need copies of the policies. As my colleague Mark mentioned previously, usually the minimum limits of insurance that we need under the local policies is 300,000 for private passenger vehicles, 500,000 for buses and coaches, and 500,000 for watercraft. Now, those are the minimum limits, and those are the minimum limits that insurers prefer. If there are circumstances that are extenuating where you simply cannot obtain those limits from the local insurance market, we have on occasion, it's not the norm, but we have on occasion obtained an exemption from insurers to reduce those minimum requirements. So if there's a situation where the local tour operators just simply cannot meet the local limits of the policy, it is possible, excuse me, it is possible it is possible for us to obtain an exemption from insurers, but it must be on a case-per-case basis. Moving on to section F, please, where applicable, provide us copies of these documents. Any waivers of liability that you presently use, please provide specimen copies. Please provide copies of your subcontractors insurance. Now we're going to discuss the subcontractors later on. Again, this is another critical part of the quotation process. If you have an operations manual or a risk management manual, perfect. Send those over us. Insurers love them. And if you have any promotional literature like a brochure or a leaflet, please send that to us as well. Before we move on to the next slide, do you have any questions? Okay, we have a question from Omar Lagraba. He's asking, who are the insurers or underwriters? The underwriter or insurers are Lloyd's of London, which is currently rated A- by AM Best, which is the biggest financial strength rating agency in the world. So yeah, the security is Lloyd's of London. Okay, next slide, please. We don't need to go through each individual question here. It's pretty self-explanatory. Please answer the questions regarding employees. Please answer the questions regarding excursion and tour participants. But going back to employees for a second, excuse me. If your employees are trained in CPR or first aid, perfect. Could you send us a copy of those certificates or qualifications as well? Yeah, please read through these questions here, excursion and tour participants, and just again, self-explanatory. We don't need to go through them. And then you have the questions on the equipment as well. Could you move on to the next? Go ahead.
Conor, real quick, on background checks, you know, I've seen background checks go from one extreme to the other. What is sort of the level of an acceptable background check? Because some can be very detailed, others are a little bit more cursory.
Okay, right. It's basically, it just needs to be a cursory background check, like, you know, a criminal check, and it doesn't have to be even employment check. It's really just a criminal background check. Okay, this part of the application is very, very processed. Now we're getting onto the food and liquor section. Again, we don't need to go through each individual questions. They're pretty straightforward. But the reason why this section is so important is that insurers need to know whether to add host liquor liability to the policy. Coverage for host liquor liability, it is available. It's possible to add it, but we need to know whether it should be added or not. And how our underwriters determine that is by you answering this section of the application form. Any questions on this section?
So Conor, on this section, and I ask you to kind of spell that out maybe on each one of them, is what are the missing elements that, you know, you get sent to you that you have to go back to the person inquiring, go ahead and provide additional, you know, information. Obviously, you know, we've since we've been working with you, we've gotten a few email, you know, copies back and forth, and it seems to be the simple ones. Obviously, those simple ones people aren't understanding. So on this particular page, is there anything on here that you know, you're following back up with the inquirer to ask further, you know, questions, or they're just not marking yes or no?
Yeah, it's just a matter of people failing to mark yes or no on occasion. Now, it isn't really this section of the application form which causes problems or which can be an obstacle. It's actually other sections, some that we've touched on already, but some that we've yet to go through. But that is exactly a topic that I was proposing to discuss towards, you know, in the Q&A section, when we can like more explain that this is really where people fall down on the application process, A, B, and C. So we'll touch on that later on if that's okay.
Okay, fantastic. I'll move on to the next one.
Okay.
You got a chat.
We have a question from Marcelino Calvo. Would your company accept a local liability of less than 300,000? It's possible. It's possible. Now, there would need to be a valid reason as to why you can't obtain the 300,000 limit locally. But we have, again, on occasion, managed to reduce the minimum requirement down to 100,000. We have been able to do that, but there would need to be a substantial reasoning as to why you can't meet the 300,000 limit. Could we move on to the next slide, please? Subcontractors. Okay, this is very, very, very important. And Tom, Larry, this is one of the sections, if not the principal section, which causes delays in the application process. It's insurers need to know who your subcontractors are. It's as simple as that, because your subcontractors, even though they carry their own insurance, will still be covered under your policy. So underwriters naturally need to understand who exactly they are insuring. So we need to know who your subcontractors are, what tours your subcontractors provide, and we're going to need copies of your subcontractors' insurance. Now, it might seem pretty straightforward, but unfortunately, it's not. This is arguably the section of the application form which causes the most delays in getting a quote, and which slows things down. So, if you're a larger operator, like the larger operators tend to subcontract out almost everything. So underwriters are going to need to know, and if you could put it even in an Excel spreadsheet would be ideal, who your subcontractors are, which tours they provide, what is the limit of insurance carried under their own local policies, and do they name you as an additional insured on their policies? So please be sure to answer these questions, but also to provide the additional information that is needed. Any questions before we move on to the next slide?
Marcelino did follow up with a question. And Marcelino, I'm assuming you mean, do we have a way to ensure guides? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, do you want me to step in here?
Hello? Yeah, please do.
Yeah, okay. Again, depends who employs the guide. Mostly the guides would be working for you and they'd be subcontracted to you. And it may be that you'll need to add the guide to your policies, whatever policies you have locally, because generally speaking, an individual person is unlikely to be able to buy this cover. If the guide actually works on board the cruise line and comes ashore to perform excursions, then they should be discussing insurance with the cruise line. So they fall into two different categories. So whether it's a shore-based guide working for the shore excursion company, in which case it's part of this program, or whether it's a shipboard-based guide that comes ashore to perform the shore excursion, in which case the cruise line is probably going to be looking at how to cover the liabilities for that guide.
Thank you, Mark.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
just to go back on the last one real quick. When we talk about the subcontractors insurance, the last point is it required that the subcontractor names the tour operator as additionally assured?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yes, it is. Yes, it's a requirement under our program that the subcontractor names the applicant or the main insured as an additional insured.
Okay, so that's a showstopper if they don't.
So,
it's not
may I have a
necessarily a
question?
showstopper. It's preferred. Yeah. It's definitely preferred. Again, there would need to be a good reason as to why the subcontractor isn't naming the insured as the main tour operator as an additional insured. Like there would have to be a good reason, but it's not necessarily a showstopper, but it is definitely preferred by insurers.
Jackie?
So may I have a question, sir? So regarding the name list is we need to be submit in advance of our guide names who using in the cruise operation, show excursions. So we need to send the guide names as a subcontractor, right?
When you say the guide name, you mean your subs? Yes, we would need to know who your subs are and what tours they provide, absolutely, and copies of their policies, yes.
So for example, our our protocol are very limited in futures. At that time, not frequently. Each call we have to submit the guide name, because of we used to organize not permanent guide as a on-call guide for the cruise show excursion. So each call we have to update the name.
Not necessarily for each call. No, if you were to provide us just with, let's say, a pool of subcontractors that you may potentially use over the coming 12 months, we wouldn't have to adjust a policy on a per call basis. If you were to provide us with, let's say, a pool of subcontractors that you would potentially use over the forthcoming 12 months, that would suffice. Does that answer your question, Jackie?
Yeah, that is my question. And another thing is that regarding cruise passengers coverage. So last time we used to work with one of the cruise, the insurance broker. So 5,000 head packs per year cover, 1 calendar year. So we pay, they calculate based on this, our not detailed name and detailed cruise, but they're asking for example, the dozen of our cruise hall name and the 5,000 packs cover. So during these 12 months calendar years, no more incidents happen. Okay, we have to renew our policy again. So in case of happen, so at that time we have to submit a claim for each passenger name, or in case of accidents or lost and found. So that is our practice in last time. So your policy also similar like that, only
yes,
5,000 head, for example, per year, right? Any type of tourists, but especially specific tourists for these cruise passengers, right?
Yeah. Oh no, our policy, even though it's designed for cruise, it's for the cruise industry. It is designed to meet the insurance requirements of the cruise industry. It is possible to insure non-cruise guests. So we can insure, we do insure non-cruise guests. Yeah. So, I mean, it's possible to purchase our insurance policy without even doing business with the cruise lines. So even though it's designed to do business with the cruise lines, it can also operate for other purposes as well.
Okay, I got it. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, if there's not any more questions, let's go through this section of the application. Okay, this is arguably the most important part of the application process. As you can see, this is we cover quite a comprehensive list of tours and excursions. What we need here from you is to allocate a percentage of your estimated sales to the specific tour that you provide. So if you do 10% bird watching, please add 10% there. If maybe a quarter of your revenues are derived from, let's say, kayaking, well, then please allocate 25% to kayaking. Now, this might seem elementary and straightforward, but you would be surprised how many times we receive an application form where these excursions do not add up to 100%. So please check your math after you've allocated the percentages to each tour to make sure that it adds up to 100%. Any questions on tours that we offer?
To your point, Connor, that was one example that came through on an email the other day, that somebody had missed it by 0.5% and you had to send it back. So again, that all takes more and more time. But I guess the question I've got is, if it is 99.5, isn't that good enough? Don't you have enough information?
It is. Not necessarily, because we need to know exactly where your revenues derive from, because it could be a case where that 0.5% that you missed was allocated to excursion, to a different excursion that you didn't declare on the application form. So then let's just say 99% was allocated to scooters, but you missed that 1% that you do for spearfishing. Now that changes the exposure that underwriters need to cover, you understand, because there is certain risk associated with spearfishing. So no, not necessarily. We would need a full 100%.
Okay, and that makes sense, and thanks for that clarification. But again, making sure that the percentage of individual itemized tours, but also the revenues need to equal that 100%, correct?
Yeah, the revenues need to make sense, but we'll be discussing the revenues on the next page, I believe. So going down to the next section of this particular page here's your chance to disclose what activities are provided by your subcontractors. Again, very, very important that we receive this information.
Okay.
Any questions before we move on to the next section?
There are a couple of questions in chat. Mark Barton, you were going to answer the one from, I believe, Marcelino.
Yes, you've asking a question about whether or not we have a program to insure tour guides. We do have a program, but unfortunately, insuring individual guides is pretty much impossible. It's just not cost effective. If we have individual guides that work exclusively for anyone that's applying for short excursion cover, then we would look and talk to our underwriters to see if we can ensure that the program that you buy as the shore excursion operator includes the activities of the guides, but that's only going to work where those guides work exclusively for you, and we declare it to the underwriters and we get it agreed beforehand. But we don't have anything available where an individual tour guide can contact us for cover. We just can't do that.
Thanks, Mark. Conor, you want to take Rita's question before we move on?
Yeah, well, it's more of a comment, I believe, than a question. Rita Pont stated almost all of our operations are subcontractors, example, buses, guides. Some of them don't belong to big companies. We can cover those, no matter how many subcontractors you use. Let's just say if you subcontract 100% of your tours and excursions, we can cover them under the policy. That's not a problem. We just need to know who they are and which tours they provide and what limits of insurance they carry under their own local policies.
Yeah. Can I just add in there that a lot of the policies we've done here in Europe have been for effectively the tour operating companies who don't have any coaches, they don't have any watercraft. Everything they do is subcontracted, and that's pretty usual. That's pretty usual. And we do need copies of those subcontractors' insurances to make sure they meet our minimum requirements. And in some instances, we have told underwriters, for example, on some of the auto policies that we cannot get the shore excursion company added as an additional insured to the motor policy because it just can't be done. And that's been accepted by the underwriters, but it's something we have to discuss with the underwriters. That's not blanket.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Any more questions?
Conor, you see the one from Deborah?
Deborah, is group insurance possible? For example, if a group of small operators, Deborah Grant asks, is group insurance possible? For example, if a group of small operators come together, can they be considered? Deborah, you actually raised that point last week as well, so thank you for doing so again this week. That request is currently under consideration by insurers. So we should have an update for you on that in the coming days, but we've already presented that proposal to our underwriters and we're expecting a response back within the next day or so, and we'll be sure to let you know. Okay, this is where you state what limits of insurance that you request. I know we realize that the application states, options of 1 million, 2 million, and 5 million. Currently, we can only offer a maximum of 3 million under our program. So if you do require the 3 million, just check the other box and insert 3 million. Now we are working on obtaining the additional 2 million capacity that we need. Some cruise lines do require, particularly on the auto, that a limit of 5 million is carried. Now, we have seen exemptions been made from the cruise lines or exceptions made where they will. In fact, we have obtained several exceptions from the major players, from the major cruise lines for, let's say, a 3 million limit of insurance, because right now the insurance market is very, very tough. It's a very challenging place at the moment. Rates are going up and supply is going down. So it's a tough place to operate at the moment, as I'm sure my colleague Mark would attest to as well. But so just be aware that the maximum limit under our program is 3 million. Any questions before we move on to the next section?
Yeah, I've got one here.
Go ahead.
Just a point, really. We've got on here that we're asking for the gross sales for the last 12 months and the estimated gross sales for the next 12 months. We recognise that in most people, the estimated sales for the last 12 months is probably 0. So a lot of people have been giving me their pre-pandemic turnover figures as well as the last 12 months. So it's 3 sets of figures in there.
Yes, correct, correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Last 12 months is 0 revenue, 0 operations. So almost 20 and up to 2019, we have been operated. So that's record can be available.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And please be sure to insert the total number of guests for the next 12 months. This is primarily what the policy is going to be rated on. This is one of the main factors that would contribute to your premium, your estimated number of guests. So it is very, very important that you put as accurate an estimate as you possibly can. Now, I understand we're still living in very uncertain times. And there's only, and it might be difficult to estimate, what those guest numbers will be. Just try to be as accurate as you possibly can. You're not going to get penalized for insurers by insurers should estimate not be exact. Any questions? Any further questions? Contingent automobile liability, again, straightforward. Just please let us know if your vehicles are owned or non-owned. If you're subcontracting, the vehicles are going to be non-owned, but we need to know what type of vehicles are transporting the guests. So if they're private passenger vehicles, that's one exposure, but if they're buses and coaches that can carry up to 25, 30 people, but that's a different exposure. So we need to know what type of vehicles are being used. Now we can move on to the next slide, please. Again, we need you to do the exact same thing with the watercraft, if they're owned or not owned. And please describe briefly, the make and model of the craft, its length, and what the passenger capacity is. If you have a lot of them and you can't fit it into the application form, we can accept, information on an additional sheet, like a Word document or something like that. Any questions? Okay, let's move on.
I am seeing a question in here.
Awesome. Okay.
What's the position on waivers, and is a waiver required for every passenger on every tour?
No, it's not. Okay, the lower category risk, the lower risk activities, let's say like culinary tour or museum tours, walking tours, bird watching. No, a waiver would not be required for them, but it would be required for the higher risk activities, and which I think it makes sense. So higher risk would be the likes of ATVs, zip lining, zorbing, flyboarding, dune buggies, Jeep Rhino tours. Yes, a waiver of liability would need to be signed by the guests. It doesn't have to be an individual waiver. It can be a group waiver are accepted. It doesn't have to be paper. It can be digital or electronic. But for the high risk activities, yes, a waiver of liability is required. And it's really in the operator's best interests to ensure that a waiver of liability is signed as well in order to protect themselves.
Yeah, I think what this person was trying to do, they were trying to understand where the edges might be. I've got to get a waiver signed for zorbing or snorkeling. I don't have to get a waiver signed for an island bus tour.
No, not for an island bus tour. Not for like, as I said, museum tours, culinary tours, walking tours, bird watching, the lower risk excursions.
Very good. Thanks.
You're welcome. Next slide, please. So what are the next steps? Okay, so the next steps is to submit a fully completed application form. We've just went through it. Ensure that all of the supporting documentation is included, like, for example, a copy of the local policies, a copy of the subcontractors' policies, a copy of the waivers of liability. If you have an operations manual, perfect. If you have any promotional brochures that explain the tours that you offer, excellent. Just please submit all of the documentation, because once we have everything, we can turn around a quote pretty quick for you. We can bind a quote within 24. Once we release a quote, we can bind it and have the policy in place for you within 24 hours. So it's all US inquiries or Caribbean inquiries or Latin America would go to me personally. My email address is there. Any inquiries for Europe, Asia, and the rest of the world will go to my colleague Mark, who's based in our company's Isle of Man office. And again, even though we like to tell people, please allow 3 to 5 business days for a quote to be received, we can turn it around sooner than that. It could really be 1 to 2 business days. But we would at least ask you to at least give us 3 business days at a minimum.
Conor, just a quick question on this binding, just so we're clear. If people are working on getting the insurance bound with you, that has to be done with you in person. That isn't a voicemail, right? That I left you a voicemail, told you I wanted the insurance. It's a very clear process to make sure that there is an agreement, correct?
Yeah, we need, we can't accept a voicemail or a text message. We need an email from you confirming that you wish for coverage to be bound. It needs to be in writing. Absolutely. Yes, Mark. I think Mark wants to.
Yeah, I just wanted to add here that on the insurances, when the coverage is bound, you as a shore excursion operator would then probably be providing us with a list of all the cruise lines you work for, the contact details, and we will in turn provide you with individual certificates addressed to each of the cruise line offices, which you will be required to submit to those cruise lines as part of your submission for gaining agreement from the cruise line to work with them. So they're going to need that. They'll recognize a certificate we issue, which is a standard accord form that they're going to require, signed by us. It's addressed to you as a shore excursion operator, but it puts down the cruise line as the additional insured on the policy. And the cruise line is going to want to see that before they let the first passenger on your bus.
Yeah, so MHG, who are we, and what sets us apart? Firstly, you will receive very personalized service. We have dedicated shore excursion teams on both sides of the Atlantic. We have a tour operator. We have staff that do tour operators in insurance, both in our Fort Lauderdale office and our office in Europe. I personally used to be an underwriter for tour and excursion operators in insurance for 10 years now. So I know it inside out, and it's something that I'm very familiar with. And it is a niche product, and there's not many brokers out there that can say that they have expertise in this very niche section of the industry, but MHG certainly does. Brand strength, as I said, we've been trusted partners of the cruise lines for 30 years. We can count virtually all of the major players, either as clients or former clients of MHG, all of the major players in the cruise industry, that is. We have been working in the marine industry for 30 years. And as I said, geographically, we have offices. MHG has offices on the doorsteps of the 2 biggest cruise industries in the world. We have offices in Europe and offices in Florida as well. So any questions before I wrap this up, this final slide? Okay, there's our contact information there. As you can see, Mark Barton looking handsome as always. And there's me. That's not a bad yeah, that's it. Yeah, there's our contact information there. So please feel free to reach out to either of us. No problems at all.
Fantastic, Mark and Connor. This has been great. A lot of great questions from the participants. I know we had a couple of questions on the registration documents.
Well, maybe I can mention one because it was raised a couple of days ago with me. That was regarding on the tour operators when it came to the bus operations. I was asked what additional information this particular bus operator could provide for me, and he just happened to say that they have their own inspectors that inspect the buses every single day, sign off on a duplicate sheet. One of the sheets kept in the bus, the other sheet goes to head office to show that that bus is checked every single morning before it goes to the cruise terminal to make sure that the tires are good and that the seat belts are in there. And I said, yeah, underwriters love things like this. It shows that as an operator, you're taking some care over the passengers. So yeah, anything like this is good news. It helps the underwriter understand the risk more.
Okay, there is one from Greg. It says, I would like to know more about the cost and details of buying public liability insurance coverage for my 4x4 tour business.
Well, what he means, public liability, that's just another term for general liability, which is available under our program. But he would need to buy local coverage for his 4x4s first, because remember, our program isn't designed to replace local policies. So he would need to purchase local auto coverage for his 4x4s, and then come to us to purchase the tour operators insurance in order to comply with the requirements of the cruise lines.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's worth adding here that if those 4x4s were not road registered vehicles, so that's why he didn't have any insurance on them. I don't know how comfortable our underwriters will be with that. They'd probably not be too keen, but I can't take the words out of their mouth.
Sure. Yeah. Well, fantastic. Again, for those that ask questions, we really appreciate it. If anybody else that is on has got any follow-up questions, you want to raise your hand or put it in chat, be happy to have Mark and Connor answer those. Otherwise, we're going to close this meeting off. We ran off a little over, but again, as I said, it was great to see some folks that I've known in the past. Appreciate you joining us today, and we'll follow up with information out to everybody based on the recording. So with that, Tom?
And just as a reminder, you can reach out to Mark and Connor and any follow-up questions if you're getting into the details of the application and you're shaking your head saying, why do I need this, or how do I do that? Call them, send them an email. They're super responsive, so go ahead and get that done so you can at least get a quote so you can do the comparison. We want everybody to have a successful business, and one of the ways to do that is to make sure you're properly insured. We really appreciate everybody's attention today and our participation in the session. And of course, Mark and Connor, thank you both for coming back just 2 weeks in a row to really try to help make sure people are getting the information they need so they can get the insurance that they need.
Guys, Larry, Thomas, thank you also. Been great working with you. We hope this is going to continue. And
absolutely,
we're here ready to listen to your questions. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thanks, everybody.
Destination together. Won't you set me free? I'll take a train, a plane, a big cruise ship. It doesn't really matter to me. Destination people always seem to find the magic and the mystery in this